everybody. I'm going to be talking today again about my favorite DAX topic, which is virtual tables. And the reason I like these so much is they're really key to unlocking the full potential of DAX. That in the video I did a few weeks ago, I talked about the different types of tables. And virtual tables are the only tables that are fully dynamic. And so there are things you can do only within a virtual table that you can't do within Power Query or within a calculated table. And the example I'm going to show you today is one of those. And one of the things about virtual tables that's challenging is in the past it's been hard sometimes to visualize what's going on in your virtual table. And so I'm going to run through today some tips that I've accumulated over the years that really have helped me better understand and debug what's happening within my virtual tables, and overall just better understand what's happening within my DAX measures. So the example I'm going to walk through today is again through the Enterprise DNA forum, and it comes from a member named Dave C. And Dave works in industrial safety, and I'll walk through the specifics of the example in a minute, but one thing I wanted to highlight is in this thread he produces a visual that I think is really worth taking a look at. It's fascinating, I think, the way he put this together in terms of the heat map boundaries for the scatter chart. And if you go in here, it dynamically recalculates. And then in the regional slicer, let me show you this, that he actually is able to ghost out the unselected points. And so there's some really cool visual aspects to this. Definitely recommend if you're interested in advanced visualization, taking a look at this. So back to the example. Basically what he wanted to do was he had a series of safety scores, and he wanted to normalize those so that the top score was 10, and then come up with dynamically the nth item in that list. And so originally when he talked to me about this, we just thought, hey, maybe doing this just through a simple rank X measure will work. And then what we realized is a lot of his normalized values have ties. And so for example, if you want the 7th item on the list, there's oftentimes in a rank X with a lot of ties, there's not going to be a number 7. So there's no easy way to pull that out of a filter condition. So what we decided on was a top end based measure, so that it would always count down the nth number. So 7 on the stack, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then pull that value out, whether or not that ranking was 7 or not. But it was always the 7th one on the list. And this is akin to if you're pulling the 7th card from a deck, is you count out 7 cards and then you flip over that stack of 7, and the card on the bottom is the one you want. And we're going to do the equivalent of that in a top end measure. And let me show you the measure that we're going to use. So basically, before we do that, this is just a parameter that we put in the modeling tab, and then just with a slider, and then a harvest measure using just basic selected value to capture the value of that nth item choice. And that's going to become important in a minute. So if we look at the measure in Tabular Editor 3, and that's going to lead to my first tip, which is basically using an external tool such as Tabular Editor 3 or DAX Studio to visualize your virtual tables. It's technically possible to do this using the Modeling New Table tab, but that's going to create physical tables within your data model. You're going to have to manually flip between that and the editor, and it's just a slow and difficult way to do it. I think when you see the dynamic way in which it can be done through an external tool, you'll see the benefit. So what we can do here is basically create a new DAX query. And if you remember, DAX queries return tables. Unlike measures, they return tables. So what we can do is we can take our our initial measure, and let's copy this over to our DAX query. And we'll start to take this apart piece by piece. And if you remember, DAX queries start with evaluate. So if we put evaluate in, we're going to get an error initially. And the reason we get an error is because, as I mentioned, DAX queries expect a table result. And so because this was a measure, the last two variables here, result and final, are scalars. And so what we can do here is change out the return value. And this gets to my next tip, which is you can debug virtual tables in much the same way you do with measures, piece by piece, by changing the return value. And so what we can do here is let's start with the first virtual table, the v-eval table. And you'll see when we put that in as the return, the error goes away because now it's getting a table, which is what it expects at the end. And if we look at this, basically all we're doing is we're taking the original data, which are the safety scores, and we're normalizing those and adding that normalized value column to the virtual table. So if we hit F5, we can see we've got the index, the value, the region, which we're not going to use, and the normalized value. And one of the nice things about the way TE3 now handles this is you can sort these values up or down. You can click here and you can filter the values, so you can experiment with the shape and content of those virtual tables in a way that really lets you explore the results in an intuitive way. So this is giving us exactly what we'd expect. It returns 50 rows, which is the full data set. So that's all going well. So let's go down and explore the next table, which is, and what we're doing here is we're taking top n using the nth item slider value, so that seventh value of the virtual table above, and we're taking that top end based on the normalized value in descending order. So this is, in that analogy I had before, this is basically counting 7 cards off the top of the stack. And so let's take this table top end value, and let's change our return function to that. And if we hit F5, it falls over. We don't get anything. And let's take a look at why that is, because this is a really important concept for debugging and understanding virtual tables. So we've got this v-eval table. We've got our normalized value. It's in descending order. And we knew all that was working from the past table. So the main suspect here is our selected value measure that I mentioned before, the nth item slider value. So if we go back to Power BI, we look at this, that's basically just harvesting this. And the reason this is falling over is that sliders exist within the context of a page. And so in this case, when we're looking at debugging that table out of context, that selected value has no context around it. It's trying to pull from somewhere outside the scope of this calculation. And so it doesn't have anything in terms of being able to pull that number. So we're getting a top n, but we don't know what the n is in top n because that selected value is returning a blank. And so how do we handle that? And the answer is that in the selected value measure, and this is something that is subtle and it often goes unnoticed, but we always pay attention to the first parameter in selected value. But there's a second parameter, which is an alternate. And it'll show here the value that is returned when there is no value or more than one value in the specified column, if omitted blank is returned. So what it's been doing is it's been pulling the blank as the alternate. But what we want to do here is, for debugging purposes, we want to put a real value in here. So let's put that 7 in. And what that says is, if we're operating out of context in this debugging environment and it doesn't find a selected value, it's going to use the number 7. So we've hard-coded 7 in here, but we can use that as a way to check whether the measure is now doing what we want it to. And if we go back to our DAX query and we rerun this, oh, actually what we've got to do is we've got to save this first. And if we save it, and now we rerun this query, now we're actually going to get values. And you'll see here, evaluate returns 7 rows, which is exactly what it should, because that top end value of 7. So let's continue down the line to the next virtual table. So we've got vtable nth item, and what this is doing is this is now taking, and we've got that stack of 7 cards, and this is basically flipping it over. So we were in descending order, now we're in ascending order. So this is now the lowest value of the normalized value within that stack of 7. And we're just using top end 1, so we're pulling that one card, that one record off the stack, and it's the lowest of the 7. So this is 7 deep in the stack, and this is exactly what we want. And so if we take this and copy this down to the return section, and now we hit F5. Okay, so this is interesting. So what we're seeing here is it's not returning 1 row, it's returning 3 rows because these 3 are tied. And that is exactly the reason why we use top end rather than rank X in this case. So again, not quite what we expected here. I expected 1 row, but the 3 is actually exactly correct. So we're chugging along well. And now let's go to result. And if we copy result down, this gets to my 4th tip, which is result is not a table. Result, all we're doing is we're taking the max of that 1 row table, or 3 row table in this case, and we're returning the normalized value. So this could be max, it could be min, it could be average. It's just some aggregator that's returning that one value in that table. And so if we copy this down, it's going to give us an error. And the reason it gives us an error is this is now a scalar. We've converted from our measure to working in virtual tables to now working in scalars. But this is my 4th tip, which is in the context of debugging, what you can do is just with the curly brackets, it now turns that scalar into a table, just a 1-cell table. But now again, we can hit F5 and it'll return the value here. And then what we've got here is just a final error check, which is if it turns out that the evaluation table is smaller than the number of rows, the nth item we've requested. So if we had a data set that was only 10 rows long and we requested the 11th item, it would return insufficient data. But we know in this case that our data set is big enough. But what we can do is we can just test that and just type final in here. And again, because that's a scalar, we also need the curly brackets. And we hit F5 and we get the same value here. So we've gone through and we've really delved in and debugged this virtual table. We've used the alternate value in the selected value to keep it from falling over out of context. So we've accomplished a lot here, and I just want to show you one additional tip that I found really useful, and I find it interesting just because it kind of forces DAX to do something it doesn't want to do, which is, let's take a look at visualizing this virtual table. So there are times when, just in the context of doing your debugging, you're going to want to see in Power BI what that table looks like. And the general rule is that a measure can only return a scalar, not a table. But there's one cheat that I'm going to show you that allows it to kind of quasi-return a table. And what that does, if we go back into TE3 and take a look at this measure, which is visualize virtual table, what we've got here is all the virtual tables that we had initially. And then we want to display, let's say, on that front report page, the V table top N. And we want to display that as a table. And you can't return a table directly, but one of the things you can do is, using this concatenatex function, you can actually take that virtual table name and take the values in that table and concatenate them. In this case, I just concatenated them with some spaces and the pipe symbol. And then, using as the delimiter Unicar 10, which is the Unicar code for hard return, you can create something that basically looks like a virtual table. It looks like the physical manifestation of a virtual table. And I can show you what this looks like. If we take this measure and we go back to Power BI and we drop this into a card measure, that typically if you try to drop a table into a card measure, it's going to give an error. But what we've done through concatenatex is turned that table into a scalar, just that looks like a table. And you can see it's fairly primitive, but it's returning exactly what we expect, and it's doing so in a dynamic way. So if we right now we've got seven rows in that table. If we were to bump this out to say 10, you'll see that changes to 10 rows, and the nth value changes, and we see that right here, 8.23. So this is a way that oftentimes I've found that it doesn't provide a really good format. It doesn't provide an ability to sort, but it is a way to push a table into a measure and show that in your report. So it's a really helpful debugging trick, and in some cases it actually will provide a good enough format in a card value that you can use it in a report. So I wanted to show you that. One other thing, just real briefly, in my previous video on scripting, one of the things I forgot to show is one of the best things about the scripting is the ability in the model to just go through and in your macros to format all your DAX measures in a model. So right there I just clicked, and that just reformatted every DAX measure in this model. So that was something I meant to show in the last video. Wanted to make a point of just highlighting that today. So that's all I wanted to cover. Hopefully that's given you some food for thought in terms of working with virtual tables and some additional tips and tricks for understanding what's going on within your virtual tables. So I hope you found that helpful. And as always, thanks for watching.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to Enterprise DNA TV. If you enjoyed the content covered in this particular tutorial, please throw the video a like. It really helps us and we really appreciate it. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Enterprise DNA TV channel. We have a huge amount of content coming out all the time from myself and a range of content creators, all dedicated to improving the way that you use Power BI and the Power Platform. Lastly, check out Enterprise DNA's website, plenty of resources and further learning that you can access very easily. All the best. Take care.